Hello, everyone. Hi. Thanks so much for joining our future travel live stream. This is our second in the series. We're going to have 17, and we're talking about our second story, which is called Bol-a-days. I'm Joshua Ryan Sahar. I'm the director of Travel Tech, and we're based at the Edinburgh Futures Institute, part of the University of Edinburgh. And I'm joined today by a very highly esteemed guest, Annabelle Illingworth, who is both the founder and CEO of Vocalista, an incredible community and tourism and social responsibility platform in tourism, which we'll hear a little bit more about. And also is just a very well-traveled advocate for social and environmental responsibility in tourism. So, Annabelle, welcome. And do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Josh. It's great to be part of this narrative. So I founded Vocalista about 4 years ago, and I joined Travel Tech at the very beginning. So great to still be with you on the journey. And I've been in travel pretty much most of my career, first actually in destinations, then a bit in a comms agency, and then as a freelancer, mostly as a consultant for tourism boards, yachts, hotels, airlines, really around the management, the responsible, getting the good storytelling, and then in the branding, the identity, and all of that kind of thing. So I try and always get to the nub of like what matters, what's the purpose behind any operation, whether it's a product or a service or something like that. So I am a travel writer. I write for broadsheets and magazines in the UK, and just recently in America. Can't say who yet, but that's coming out soon. And yeah, I'm still a consultant, and then I run Vocalista, which is really it's a digital platform for social and environmental decision makers to help them onboard their stakeholder set, their community, however big or small that might be, to help get information from them. So you're empowering the community, but you're also de-risking and making better informed decision making.
Yeah, it's an incredible tool that you're developing. And it reminds me of times when I used to work at an organization called Nesta, and they did a lot around digital democracy. But I never saw anything around that in the space of tourism, especially around tourism management, which is we'll probably get into is an important point. And so when I first heard about what you were doing, I was like, I need to speak to Annabelle. So you've been a wonderful part of the community for several years. And I know you've been doing some recent traveling, so you've just come back from Antarctica, is that right?
I have. I came back last week. So I was writing about what's effectively a luxury pop-up in the interior in Queen Maud Land, which is in the Norwegian quadrant. And they've been going since about 2005, but they've sort of got better and better organically over the time. But their ethos is leave no trace. So they literally they used to have tents, and now they have pods. And they bring in maybe 300 guests each summer, which is about 2 or 3 months, to come and see the penguins, to come and live on the ice, like almost live like a polar explorer without all the hardship. So you get to have a taste of rock climbing and ice climbing, and really appreciate Antarctica as well. I think that's part of the thing. It's a transformational spiritual journey, a digital detox, and a massive adventure. So it's kind of a nice package. And I was just looking at sort of like, what's the mindset between putting something together like that, which was great fun.
Yeah, incredible. Well, first of all, trip of a lifetime, but that idea of leave no trace is so important, especially for a climate like that. Interestingly, I've spent the weekend in Edinburgh Zoo, so I spent an awful lot of time with penguins, as my daughter loves them. But yeah, it was very fun. It was very fun. So should I give a quick summary of the story, and then let's dig in, because I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this. Like I said before, it's our second story, and it's called Bol-a-days, and it follows a family. It's a single parent family. Mark is the dad, and he's got 2 children, Alpha and Beta. Very futuristic names. And what happens is basically he is struggling with trying to be a really good dad and take them on holidays that are really engaging and interesting. But what the kids are really into is, of course, new virtual reality headsets. And one day they all sort of just get together and they decide, well, come on, let's do something different for our holidays. And he wanted a holiday that meant he could just finish off some of his work, mix that work and life together. But also wanted something that kind of helped his kids break out of that digital experience and really sort of live like he did, perhaps, and sort of have those in-person experiences that are a little bit more gritty. So they get around the kitchen table and they have a dialogue. It doesn't go into detail how, but they go into dialogue about how how and where they should go for their holiday, and they agree upon a trip to rural Scotland, going to various different farms in rural Scotland to have a sort of agri-tourism experience. And through that AI tool, they decide to do the most sustainable trip, that they should go on a cargo ship that's already going that way. So they hop onto the cargo ship, they see amazing orca pods and various things like that. They then get to the destination and they get their hands dirty. The kids are out there on the farm. Sounds like it's some sort of organized experience where they're sort of digging potatoes and they're running away from bulls and animals on the farm. And I think the culmination of the story is they've had a great time. They've experienced something that is not the digital. It's something that's true. It's real. They've literally got their hands dirty, and I think the dad is happy to have given that experience. So that's the story in a quick summary. I would recommend reading the whole thing. It's great. I'll just quickly show the illustration. So here it is. This is done by Esme McIntyre, a fantastic Scottish artist, and it was written by Maura Ryan, who has written all of our stories coming from our workshops. And this one came from a particular workshop with our Catalan tourism technology sister cluster. We did that back in 2022. Really great session. And so, yeah, that's the story. Annabelle, what were your initial responses? What were your initial thoughts?
Well, firstly, what does Bol-a-day mean? I mean, I just don't even know what the Bol stands for. I think I'm probably quite a few people in that position. I mean, it's obviously a play on holiday, but I'm not quite sure what the B is. But I think generally,
blended, but yeah.
There we go. So that brings on to my first point, I think, which is it's a nice blend of work-life balance, but it's also between the digital and the real world. Because I think I certainly grew up without, we didn't have digital in the same way when I grew up. And it's even now I find it's a massive rabbit hole. And I mean, this is a travel tech discussion, right? So we're working in the digital sphere, and it can be just like all consuming on your computer, and you forget about sometimes about the real world. So I think that's what I do like about this story is this father figure trying to and the children are enthusiastic about it, and they encourage it. It's sort of that engagement with the real world, but bringing the convenience and the frictionless almost of the digital into it with the VR headsets, with the sort of travel planning and that kind of thing. And I think that's where it's got a role. I have used the VR headsets. They make me very unwell. And I actually think, it's, I saw one a couple of days ago about someone imagining climbing up the Matterhorn, where they were climbing up a wall, a real wall, but on their headset, they were climbing up to the top of the Matterhorn. And it was just like extraordinary. But I mean, I think sometimes you want the fresh air blowing in your face, but I appreciate that's not available to everyone.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's, the things you were picking up on there is this sense, I think, about in the story about trying to help them experience the real. And I guess something that's always the essence of travel tech, which is trying to use technology to enable a more in-person experience.
Yeah, and I think from the story, I think I picked out about 3 sort of key themes that were in it. One was sort of social, or sort of money, work, parenting. The cargo ship's cheap. The father's got to keep going with his work. The other's transport with the cargo ship, which is obviously a key point. And the other one's digital, which is a VR headset and gaming and digital detox. I think the cargo ship is, for me, it's a non-starter. I have actually done that, going from Spain over to Italy in a cargo ship with a car, and I mean, it's just not scalable. And I think it's a nice idea of trying to find other ways that are, well, it's cheap, but you can probably go on a bus as well. So and I'm not sure how many farms you can access in Scotland with it, but I think that the concept of thinking outside the box, I love it.
Yeah, because I think it must have come from so when we're doing these workshops, we have these sets of cards that give sort of different perspectives on travel. So there's some called the way to the past, there's some which are the push to the present, and there's some of a sort of sense of the future. It's like a 3 horizons framework. And I can remember when I was facilitating this session, the group was talking about this because they were thinking about that travel tech company Hotel Tonight, which is this idea of you've got spare capacity in a hotel on an evening and you could sell it. And they were like, well, how do you do that in travel to help reduce the climate impact? So they were like, well, if you've got a ship already going that way, then maybe you could just hop on. But you're right, it's hard. And you know, I mean, what do you think are the barriers to that type of travel? Why is it something you think wouldn't take off?
Well, for starters, you'd have to retrofit the cargo ship so that it'd be suitable for passengers. I'm sure there's a liability element for it.
Oh, yeah.
You'd have to make the cabins at least a little bit more comfortable. There's also the responsibility of the cargo ships. You're actually then changing the role of the staff on the ship to actually be, you know, they're having to do something outside their normal job, which is extra pressure on them. And as it's cheap, it's not that much extra income. So I think just the pure logistics of putting something like that together. I mean, if you're going down to say St. Helena or something where there's only one ship and it's going in and, you know, everyone's really excited to get their their mail bag or something, then yeah, then I think it's suitable. But just for short hops when you've got other options available, probably
not a realistic thing.
No.
Yeah, I mean the liabilities, and I think what you said is like the business model for this is just it's non-starter. But it is interesting, right? I think thinking about how spare capacity in transport still something we haven't fully solved. I know that Uber does routes that you can all sort of jump in the same taxi and things like that. But yeah, for these long journeys, it's a tough one.
I think it's good for cargo. So one of the things we've launched at Vocalista, it's actually our tool that we've launched, is an environmental reporting app where you're outsourcing sort of citizen science to help you gather environmental data in the field, and we're doing it around marine litter along the coastlines of Skye and then further down into the Oban area. And one of the things is once you've picked that up, if it's not going to go to landfill, is how on earth do you get it to a factory or somebody who's going to transport it? And one of the things we've come up with, actually someone else who's in the cluster actually, is finding empty loads. So, but that's for cargo rather than people. And I think that's fantastic. And I think that's got a lot of scope. And I love the idea of putting, I mean, it's very popular in hotels, you know, of just, but then you don't want to devalue, I'm looking at it from a business perspective, you don't want to devalue the product. So it's got to be sort of a little bit of smoke and mirrors and that kind of thing. But then you also feel like, oh, I've got a good deal, which is great.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, it's always trying to sort of revenue management in hotels is a critical thing. But what you're doing with Vocalista on the environmental side, especially around understanding that sort of sea litter, sounds like it's going to be particularly important, especially for island communities. So we're putting the cargo ship aside. Interesting concept, perhaps unrealistic. In fact, almost certainly unrealistic. What about this idea, the sort of the crux of the story, which is a family going over to Scotland, working on farms and having that sort of real experience? What are your thoughts on that? What are the type of things you've experienced as a quite a seasoned travel expert?
Well, firstly, I love the idea of engaging more authentically with the community and giving back. Start on that. I do question in this story whether there's a little bit of sort of childcare involved. You know, how much is it farm activities and how much is it, you know, I need to find an activity for the children to do. But the father's actually been pretty savvy in finding a solution that is both good for his children and gives back to the local community. It does sort of remind me of sort of volunteerism when it first started out, of just sort of like, how much are you actually giving back to the community and what would be the logistics of doing this? So would you then sort of get platforms coming up or matchmaking services? Like how on earth do you find farmers that you can go and help and who are willing to put you up and all that kind of thing? So I think there's a lot of sort of stuff underpinning it, but the basic concept of going and engaging properly and submerging yourself in a community, I think is wonderful. It's just what's the purpose of it and how meaningful is it and to who benefits? I think, you know, do both parties benefit at the same level? But in principle, I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, agritourism has been like a booming industry, especially in Scotland. But I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one has been the financial the potential benefits of being a farmer financially are harder to come by. It's you know, smaller margins. It's much more difficult. So people have been diversifying what they've got, which is a great outdoor space, and then building self-catering accommodation and you know, agricultural experiences. So you can see people going down that route. It's interesting. I went when I was younger. I went grape picking in the south of France for an agri-tourism experience, but it was very much more on the hard work side. It felt like an awful lot of labor, but they were the best experiences. They were amazing experiences. Sometimes terrible, but memorable, and met a whole load of people from all around the world. So I think there's something there. But again, it goes back to what you said about who benefits and how do you make that work, and how does technology enable it as well? I mean, are these platforms that you just sort of buy into? How do you make and set the standards of this type of experience so that people are not going in thinking they're going to be pampered? They know they're going to have to work, but it's really interesting, exciting. And how do you get a balance of a good experience whilst also doing something productive for the farm? So I mean, what volunteerism experiences have you seen that have worked, or things that you think maybe reflect this part of the story?
Well, I think what is it? Somebody was saying on a recent trip, talking about type 1 and type 2 fun, of like fun in the moment and fun when you come back and thing when you reflect on it. And I think it's also that takeaway that you get from the experience. So I was in Grenada. I went there looking at when they first opened up after the pandemic, and sort of what was the decision making behind, because I think 40% of their income in the country is from tourism, and then another 20% is from students coming back and forth. So I mean, it's a huge decision. And then they actually, because there were no flights coming in, they didn't have any goods coming in, they didn't have any plastic, so they had this burgeoning industry of and it's very fertile soil, right? So they then all had these like pop-up little farms, and everyone started making it, which are then supplying the hotels. So they've actually created an industry from that. And rather than actually being a seasonal worker and going and working on the farms, I saw chocolate's obviously a big thing from there. And they had a chocolate factory, and so during the pandemic they'd been doing making chocolate, but they'd been live streaming it. So they'd go on for the boats that were stuck there. They picked up, they'd put all the ingredients and they'd left it on the harbour, and then the other people would come and pick it up, and they would make it. So they were sort of engaging with them. And so I think you almost have to sort of find activities that are fun to do, but also that might engage you a bit more with a way to pass on the story in the long term, about whether it's fun to make chocolate, or then actually, oh well, we grow the cocoa and this is what the process is, and understanding maybe the supply chain, or there's all sorts of other elements that you might pick up, just as well as the fun element of like, oh yeah. And finding that purpose and that meaning behind the agri-tourism that then might make you change your buying habits, perhaps in the supermarket or something like that, going, oh yes,
So you're talking about it as an educational experience, right? So in the story, children who perhaps are too digitally enmeshed are going over to a new place. And if you were structuring that type of experience, you're thinking about both balancing an element of work, but mostly sort of situating that within a storytelling process, so that they're learning about the place they're going to, they're contributing to it, and potentially even learning about where the food comes from, right?
Absolutely. And I think that is what it's that we're so focused on digital, and obviously the children in this story really enjoy seeing the humpback whales, maybe on the cargo ship, but sort of seeing that others, and seeing how maybe they'd see how other people live. So yeah, I think there are lots of positives in it.
So there's two more points that you've mentioned. One, I think, which we've hovered around. One is obviously this idea of digitally detoxing, so using technology to stop using technology, which is a really key part of this. The other is blended work. So the father has to do some more work. He's on his own. I've got two kids, and sometimes you just need to have a bit of childcare on a holiday, right? That's part of it. So I guess, picking back up on what you've said, what are you seeing in the space of that blended work, and what are you seeing in the space of digital detox? What you see that you think works, what doesn't, what interests you about it?
Well, I think the rise of the sort of digital nomad and being able to work from anywhere. That's definitely a trend at the moment. But then I'm also seeing the pushback from, say, Bali or other places where they're like, hang on a sec, you've got to actually, abide by our rules if you're going to be here. And then other countries that are absolutely falling over to sort of open sort of year-long visas in their country of like, hey, come and work from here. We'll give you really favorable tax conditions. So I think you've got to be really careful if you are working abroad, how it impacts.
Yeah.
So, but I think so. I'm looking at it more probably from the slightly younger perspective who haven't had children. Of that sort of, you can go anywhere and do anything. And I think once you bring children into the equation, everything changes because you have to have a lot more structure to it. So I think that's where the organization element comes in and is really handy. And what else have I seen? Yeah, I think the sort of this blended leisure. I think certainly if you're going on a business trip now, people will quite often tag on an extra couple of days to engage with the destination as well. But again, that's not necessarily with their family. I was chatting to some journalists who's quite interesting. It's quite interesting sort of watching people's career, and they used to do trips on them by themselves, and now all their storytelling becomes doing trips with their children. So taking your children skiing or going and engaging in it. I mean, because I do ski journalism, right? So that's the example I have. But or there's an influencer who's now a single mother, and so that becomes part of their worldview. And so that I think it's inevitable, and I think it's realistic. And I think with hybrid working, I think it's the way to go of not having your standard. If you can avoid having your standard 9 to 5, and break out into these different situations, I think that's only to be encouraged.
Yeah, I think especially after, in the post-pandemic, and the ability to take your children on your work trips if you can, and add it on and expand it. I mean, I was doing a panel in Barcelona, and one of the members of the panel had traveled to Barcelona and brought the family because it was like, well, I'll do this full day's work and it'll be intense. They'll be down at the beach, and then I've got a whole weekend with them. And it just makes sense. But I know this is a technology challenge. There is a couple of companies that are looking at it, but the ability to almost like split what you spend and how it relates back to your work and how it relates to is a tough thing. I guess in this story, it's more, I've still got so much work to do. Kids will be occupied in a really positive way. I'll be able to join in when I can, but I'll also be in a space where I can do it. And connectivity is always going to be a challenge. And I know that you're in Sky, and that's been a challenge there sometimes. So I guess anything like this is underpinned by that broad connectivity.
Yeah, connectivity in so many senses. I mean, connectivity to the local community, but also digital connectivity. And you've got to know that you've got a good connection. I mean, our internet connection, when we're not on the fiber network, we never will be, and that's a huge issue to us. Of you can't even hold a Zoom call sometimes. So I think choosing places where that, well, it depends what your work is, right? Your work might not be digital focused, but you do probably need to have that connection back to home, which is what enables you to go away at that time. I think it's great now that a lot of meetings, again, there are two different types of work. Some you have to be present, and some are office focused, and so that gives you the flexibility. But that the rise of Zoom meetings, I mean, it was absolutely wonderful. I mean, that's one of the things that allowed us to start our company, was the fact that, I mean, yes, everyone was locked down, but they were instantly available. But I was talking to people in Canada and South Africa and from Sky, and that's been fantastic, of just being able to maintain business, but for the future. I think in a sort of in the modern age, I think it is changing.
So thinking about the story itself, and then you're in the world of, first of all, you're a travel professional, but you're also thinking about how does technology interact with this in a way that boosts the community. Thinking and reflecting on this story, what is the type of technology that you're seeing, or the innovations you're seeing, that can make this a reality or make a different reality in this sort of space? So how do you see technology creating better voluntourism experiences or better community experiences? And do you have any principles that you work to when you're developing Vocalista around making sure that technology is enabling a better relationship between the visitor and the host community or host business, as in this case?
Well, I think it all comes down to the local experiences, authentic experiences in the destination. So you've got to engage all the population, and the challenge is, well, how do you do that, right? Everyone's time poor. If you're doing agritourism, you've probably got quite a long day. So then to then go ahead and learn something about digital of going on, I think it's also awareness of maybe a digital platform, and then that sort of reputation element, like say eBay does, or whatever, of like trustworthy, of like, if I'm going to go and stay with these strangers, and you're going into someone, well, it depends whether you're put up with the family or in separate accommodation or something, but it's just that sort of how do you actually connect these people and work out what is going to be meaningful? How do you choose it? And then almost do you have to start marketing yourself as a small business or an agritourism business? How do you start attracting people? And then that becomes part of your business model. So it's sort of, but I think certainly on Sky, we've got, a lot of people just go to the Instagram spots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it is trying to sort of find those other places. But those other places, because they're off the beaten track, they probably aren't in the flow of getting more people in. So it's almost a sort of a challenge of, well, how do you create that? You probably need a directory. You need, there's all sorts of Facebook groups and things of that popping up and that kind of thing. But how do you even start? You need somebody to coordinate it, really. I don't think it's realistic to reach out on your own to a random farmer and go, hey, there needs to be standards, there needs to be frameworks, and it would need to be put in place, which is completely conceivable. But you'd need, I think, a business to do that. Definitely.
Yeah, the discoverability element. And it was so interesting what you were just saying about Sky, because you were talking about the hotspots and how they're almost like Instagram hotspots. And I can remember, but 5 years ago, we were talking about them as like TripAdvisor hotspots, like the top 10. And now it's Instagram, but now it's TikTok. And perhaps the next space is AI. So in the story, they're having that conversation with this, the way I envisaged it, at least, was almost like this, speaker on a table. They're all sat around it, around a dialogue with an AI travel companion, and maybe that is the space that people are then creating their next set of itineraries. They're finding the farms that want to work with them. So I know you're not an AI expert, but how would you if this is the biggest change in travel tech coming up? What are the principles you'd like to sort of instill into these sort of AI itinerary companions?
Well, I think it's all about personalization, right? And that's already happening. I think it's the frictionless element of, having your door key, and you still want the human to human contact, but everything that's going to, the bits that you don't need the human contact, that's just going to make the process a lot more easy. That's one thing. But then the personalization of, what do you like as a traveler? What have you enjoyed? And I think that that filtering mechanism, I think AI could be absolutely fantastic. It already does it on TikTok or all these other things. It knows what you want but without you even realizing that's what you want. And then suddenly it's showing you all this stuff, and you're like, oh gosh, yeah. So I think the technology's there, and it's just, how do you use that technology responsibly to deliver it? So I think it could easily find ideas. It could help you filter and process through everything. And then I think there's also an element of data, right? So your data and your privacy. How much do you want the AI to know about everything that it's always that, how much do you give over so that it can do the customization for you? But I think as long as the traveler is in control of that, and that you've got very clear guidelines about how it works, so that you feel comfortable about using it, I think it's great.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like, when I think about the travel tech sector, I'm looking at a lot of these itinerary builders. There's one called Layla, which has received some investment, just bought another one called Roam Around. Both really interesting ideas. And I think the big conversation in AI and travel at the moment is this idea around distribution. So you have all this data, you have all this personalization or group, family group. But how does like a small farm get to the top of that list? How do they find it? And I guess that's what might be quite interesting about the process of dialogue with an AI agent, which is, that just doesn't feel right. I want to tell me more about this one. And then the next my final thought here is, I think that agritourism is amazing. It's wonderful. I've done it. I've done it with my kids as well. But it's not an easy thing, and I think it needs to be able to generate enough money or enough productivity for a community or a farm to make it worth their while. And yeah, I don't know where else technology might play a role, but I think that's probably for a follow-on conversation. But before we go, 2 final questions. One, is there anything in this story that you'd love to see realized that you think that's worth the effort? And the second, how can we find out more about what you're doing, both in your journalism and writing, and also about Vocalista?
So what do I love? I think I love the personalization element the most of it, and that hybrid blend. I think it's completely doable and to be encouraged. And if you can put yourself in a different situation, you get the context from that situation, which might add extra value to it. So that's what I really like, is it opens your eyes to different connections, different, mental connections, human connections, that kind of thing. So I think that connectivity is the main thing that I get out of it, is just changing it up a bit. And so my work, I've got my personal portfolio for sort of consultancy work I do on annabelleillingworth.com, and on Vocalista. If you go to www.vocalista.com, you'll come to our landing page. If you don't use the www, you actually go to the platform, so you want the www, and you can read about it. And it's free to sign up. We'd love people to sign up, and then they can come with us on the journey. We're still building it out. We're just doing the front end. We're sort of refining the front end, but it's live at the moment.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'm just super delighted to have you on this, because not least are you going to some of the places that no one else in the world gets to go to, but also, and most importantly, you're developing a technology, a platform that really gets to the heart of some of these responsible tourism challenges. How do we engage everyone who has a stake in a tourism destination to make the decisions that are right for it? And often I think when I'm having conversations with people in travel tech, often it's about bringing huge numbers, when actually what we want is a balanced, responsible model. And so I'm just super delighted to be able to have another conversation with you. And I know that the Travel Tech Network will be sharing all the developments in what you're doing with Vocalista. So thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure to join you. Thanks, Josh.
Take care.
Bye.